What if I told you that everything you think you know about the Wild West is a lie? That the most dangerous outlaws weren't men with guns but starvation disease and the brutal economics of survival? That the real heroes weren't quick-draw artists but ordinary people who figured out how to create civilization from absolutely nothing, using nothing but determination, cooperation, and an almost supernatural ability to endure hardship? Tonight, we're stepping into April 1865, just weeks after Lincoln's assassination sent shockwaves through a nation already torn apart by 4 years of civil war. The frontier beckoned with promises that sounded too good to be true, and usually were. Land for free gold in the streams, cattle that practically raised themselves opportunities, limited only by a man's willingness to work hard and dream big. But people went anyway by the thousands. What drove them to abandon everything familiar for a life that would test them in ways they couldn't possibly imagine? You're about to discover the Wild West that Hollywood never shows you. A world without romantic cowboys or honorable gunfights at high noon. Instead, something far more remarkable, the true story of how your great-great-grandparents might have lived, loved, struggled, and somehow thrived in conditions that would terrify most of us today. This isn't the sanitized version where problems get solved in 90 minutes with a satisfying shootout. This is the real thing. Messy, complicated, beautiful, and brutally honest. And picture this. You wake up in a world where a single mistake could kill you, where your nearest neighbor might be days away by horseback, where the weather could destroy months of back-breaking work in a single, violent afternoon. Yet somehow, incredibly, people not only survived in this environment, they built the foundation of modern America, one rough-hewn board and hand-forged nail at a time. How did they do it? What secrets did they know about community resilience and human cooperation that we've somehow lost? Before we journey back together to discover these hidden truths, I hope you're somewhere wonderfully comfortable tonight. These stories of quiet resilience and everyday heroism work best when you're settled in for the night, ready to let your mind wander back to a time when life moved at the pace of horses and the rhythm of seasons, when people measured wealth not in dollars but in bushels of grain and the strength of community bonds. And if you find these gentle historical journeys help you unwind from the complexity of modern life, maybe the like button could use a gentle tap. There's something genuinely magical about knowing that people from around the world are all drifting off to the same story of human perseverance and community building. So close your eyes, take a deep breath, and let's travel back to a morning in 1865 when the sound of wind through wooden planks was the soundtrack to daily miracles of human determination. You open your eyes as the sun rises above the horizon, pale yellow light streaming through a wooden window that represents both luxury and necessity in this frontier town, perched on the edge of the known world. The morning air carries that distinctive smell of the American West, dry grass mixed with road dust, horse sweat, and something else, the particular scent of hope and desperation that hung over frontier communities like morning mist. The light itself tells a story about this place and time. It's cleaner here, more direct and unfiltered than what you'd experience in established cities back east, where coal smoke filters everything through a permanent grey veil. This is pure sunlight that has traveled across hundreds of miles of open prairie without obstruction, carrying both the promise and threat of another day where survival must be earned through knowledge, vigilance, and considerable luck. In the distance, horse hooves echo against wooden buildings with a rhythm that would become the heartbeat of your days here. Mixed with this are the voices of roosters maintaining their ancient ritual despite being transplanted to this harsh new world, and the persistent whisper of wind through gaps in wooden walls, a natural music that frontier dwellers learn to interpret like a living barometer. Your first physical sensation isn't the romantic awakening of Western films, but something far more real. Dust. Fine, persistent, inescapable dust that's worked its way into your mouth overnight, settling between your teeth like gritty sand. It's in your eyes, making them water in the bright light. It's infiltrated your hair and clothes and even seems to coat the inside of your throat. This is your first lesson about frontier life. The land claims you before you can claim it. The environment shapes you far more than you shape it, and adaptation isn't optional. It's the immediate price of survival. The bed beneath you tells its own story of frontier pragmatism, essentially a canvas sack stuffed with prairie grass that crackles with every movement. Through the rough fabric, you feel irregular lumps where filling has compressed into uncomfortable ridges and valleys. Something small scurries away as you shift position, a reminder that you're sharing this accommodation with the original residents. The room represents frontier practicality where every element serves multiple functions and nothing exists purely for decoration. Rough wooden walls show gaps where prairie wind finds its way inside, creating a constant whistle that experienced settlers learn to interpret as a natural weather station. When the wind changed pitch or direction, it often meant weather changes approaching within hours. A single window fitted with actual glass suggests this town has experienced some prosperity. Glass was expensive, fragile, and difficult to transport across hundreds of miles without breakage. Its presence speaks to either genuine economic success or extraordinary optimism about the community's future. Through this window, you see the main street of a frontier town in that delicate stage between temporary camp and permanent settlement. Buildings are mostly constructed of wood, weathered to silvery grey by sun and wind. Some show hurried construction typical of boom towns, but you notice encouraging signs of permanence. Fresh paint on a few buildings, flowers planted outside the general store, a proper wooden sidewalk. A woman's voice drifts from the kitchen. Coffee's on, and Martha's got biscuits if you're of a mind for breakfast. Her voice carries obvious weariness from rising before dawn, but also genuine warmth that speaks to frontier hospitality as both survival strategy and cultural value. This automatic kindness wasn't mere sentiment, but practical insurance in a place where the next crisis could affect anyone. You dress in the authentic clothes of the era. Canvas pants that feel like armor, thick enough to turn a horse's hoof or resist tears from barbed wire. The cotton shirt has been washed so many times, it's achieved remarkable softness, but also thinness that speaks to careful conservation where nothing was discarded until it literally fell apart. The boots deserve special attention, practical rather than pretty with cracked but well-maintained leather. The cracks tell stories of hot sun, cold nights, wet creek crossings and countless dusty trails. But the careful maintenance speaks to frontier priorities, regular oiling, professional resoling, precision patches. You cared for what you had with religious devotion because replacing it wasn't simple or cheap. From downstairs comes the sound of men's voices in low, measured conversations, early risers discussing the day's prospects over strong coffee, mixing practical concerns about weather work and prices with gentle humor that makes hard lives bearable. As you make your way downstairs, each wooden step creaks in a symphony of settling wood. But this isn't just noise, it's valuable information that frontier dwellers learn to interpret. Different creaks reveal weather changes, structural integrity, and sometimes early warning of unwelcome visitors. The boarding house's main room serves multiple functions: dining area, social hub, news center, occasional courtroom, emergency shelter, and meeting hall. The space efficiently accommodates these varied needs while maintaining flexibility necessary in growing communities. The The space efficiently accommodates all these varied needs while maintaining the flexibility necessary in growing communities where buildings might need to serve different purposes as circumstances changed or the community evolved. The furniture reflects this adaptability. Tables that could be moved together for large gatherings or separated for private conversations, chairs that were sturdy enough for daily use but light enough to rearrange quickly for different activities, and storage that could be accessed easily but secured when necessary. Men sit at rough wooden tables eating their breakfast with the focused attention of people who understand that good nutrition provides the energy necessary for surviving another day of physical labor. Their hats are placed carefully beside their plates, not vanity, but protection for expensive items that served multiple essential functions throughout the day. These hats weren't fashion statements, but crucial equipment that protected against sun that could cause serious burns, rain that could soak a person to dangerous levels, wind that carried stinging particles and flying debris during the kind of physical work that built frontier communities board by board and nail by nail. Their conversation pauses briefly as you appear, eyes assessing but not hostile. In small frontier communities where everyone knew everyone else's business skills and reliability, newcomers were always noteworthy and potentially significant. First impressions carried enormous weight in places where your life might literally depend on your neighbor's willingness to help during emergencies, and everyone understood that initial judgments often proved accurate over time. Morning. One man says with a nod that acknowledges your presence without demanding immediate conversation or social interaction. Frontier etiquette had evolved to recognize that some people needed time to wake up fully before engaging in complex social dynamics, especially after a night on frontier bedding that didn't encourage the kind of restful sleep that left people ready for cheerful morning conversation. Another man looks up from his plate of eggs fried in bacon grease and bread toasted over the open fire. "You're the fellow came in on yesterday's stage," he observes with the casual certainty of someone stating an obvious fact. It's not really a question. Information traveled with remarkable speed in small communities where news was both entertainment and potentially vital intelligence about changing conditions, opportunities, or threats that might affect everyone's welfare. The staging station manager, easily identifiable by his weathered appearance and the large ring of keys hanging from his belt, adds helpful context while cutting his meat with practiced efficiency. Rough trip from Denver, I'd imagine. Road's been getting worse since the spring rains turned half of it into mud, deep enough to trap a wagon wheel and strand travelers for days. Might be a week before the next stage can make it through with mail, and supplies may be longer if we get more weather. This casual mention of supply difficulties reveals another layer of frontier reality that affected every aspect of daily life in ways that people in more settled areas couldn't imagine. These isolated communities lived constantly on the edge of shortage, dependent on irregular transportation over roads that were often little more than suggestions carved into hostile terrain by previous travelers who'd managed to get through. A delayed supply wagon could mean genuine hardship for everyone, affecting not just luxury items, but essential goods like medicine, ammunition, and basic tools that kept the community functioning. A third man, older and showing the permanent scars of decades of outdoor work, joins the conversation while spreading butter on his bread with careful economy. Driver mentioned seeing smoke signals north of Eagle Creek yesterday afternoon. Might be nothing significant, but could be worth keeping eyes open for any unusual activity in that direction, especially if folks are planning to travel. This information is shared without drama or alarm, but everyone at the table pays attention with the kind of focused awareness that characterized frontier life. Smoke signals could indicate native tribal movements, wildfire that might threaten the area trouble at distant homesteads that might require assistance, or simply routine communication between groups that used visual signals for long-distance messages. In a world without telegraphs or telephones reaching into remote areas, visual signals were still important means of communication across the vast distances that separated settlements. Smart frontier dwellers paid attention to such signs and shared information that might affect community safety or individual decision-making about travel and work plans. The boarding house proprietor, a woman named Mrs. Henderson, who moves through the room with efficient authority born from years of managing a business that served as the social center of the community, refills coffee cups while participating in the conversation. Sheriff Coleman mentioned yesterday that there's been cattle rustling reported south of here. Folks should be extra careful about securing their stock and noting any strangers passing through who might be scouting for opportunities. Her contribution illustrates how information flowed through frontier communities in complex networks that ensured important news reached everyone who needed to know. The sheriff shared intelligence with business owners who interacted with many travelers, who then passed it along to their customers, creating an informal but highly effective early warning system that helped protect the entire community from various threats. A young man sits alone at a corner table, carefully writing in a leather-bound ledger with the precise movements of someone handling precious materials that must be preserved and protected. The quality of his concentration and the deliberate nature of his penmanship suggest this isn't casual correspondence but essential record-keeping, accounts that must be accurate for business and legal purposes, debts that must be documented to avoid disputes, or perhaps detailed letters to family back east who are waiting anxiously for news of his frontier adventure and business prospect. His solitary position and obvious education mark him as probably a clerk, teacher, bookkeeper, or small businessman, someone whose skills with numbers and letters make him valuable to the community, but also set him slightly apart from men whose primary value lies in physical labor and practical crafts. His neat appearance and careful mannerisms suggest someone trying to maintain Eastern standards of dress and behavior in a place where such niceties were often abandoned in favor of pure practicality. Mrs. Henderson approaches your table with a coffee pot, the gesture automatic and welcoming in the finest tradition of frontier hospitality. "Coffee's fresh as we get out here," she says with a slight smile that acknowledges the limitations of frontier life, without apologizing for them or expressing shame about conditions beyond anyone's individual control. Which means it was roasted sometime this month and ground this morning with whatever equipment we could manage to keep working. This self-deprecating humor about frontier conditions was typical of successful frontier communities, acknowledging shortcomings and limitations while maintaining dignity and even finding genuine amusement in hardship. Coffee, even imperfect coffee prepared under difficult conditions, represented civilization and comfort in a place where both were precious commodities requiring constant effort and significant expense to maintain. As you sip the strong, slightly bitter brew that carries hints of the wood smoke used in its preparation, you begin to observe the boarding house's role extending far beyond just providing food and shelter to travelers. It functions as an informal news center where information from various sources gets synthesized and shared among people who need to stay informed about changing conditions that might affect their safety, prosperity, or survival. It serves as a place where informal banking occurs as debts are negotiated, partnerships formed, and business deals discussed away from the official constraints of formal institutions that might not understand frontier conditions. It operates as a social club where isolated men can remember they're part of a larger community with shared interests and mutual obligations that extend beyond individual concerns. The conversations you overhear reveal the complex web of concerns that dominate frontier life weather predictions. that could affect crop planning and travel safety market prices that determine whether months of hard work will result in profit or devastating loss, political developments that might affect land ownership or taxation policies, and the constant stream of personal news that keeps communities connected despite the physical isolation that separates homesteads and settlements. Heard there's serious talk of organizing a proper school district, one man mentions between bites of his breakfast, and this news sparks immediate interest around the room. About time comes an enthusiastic response. Kids need education if they're going to have options beyond just farming and ranching. Countries changing fast since the war ended, and folks who can't read and cipher are going to get left behind when new opportunities come along. Question is, who's going to teach and where will hold classes? Another voice adds pragmatically. And how we're going to pay for it without putting more burden on families that are already stretched thin, trying to make ends meet in a place where cash money is scarce and expenses are high. This discussion about education reveals the forward thinking that characterized the most successful frontier communities. Despite immediate survival pressures that demanded constant attention to practical matters, thoughtful residents understood that long-term prosperity required investment in the next generation's preparation for a rapidly changing world where education would become increasingly important. A man wearing the clothes of a successful merchant enters the boarding house shaking dust from his coat and looking around the room with the assessing gaze of someone evaluating business opportunities. "Morning, folks," he says generally. "Name's Patterson, and I'm thinking about establishing a regular freight service between here and Denver. Looking to get a sense of what goods folks need regular-like and what they might have to ship out." This announcement generates immediate interest and a flurry of questions. Regular freight service could transform the community's economic prospects by providing reliable access to manufactured goods and markets for local products. The conversation that follows reveals both the community's needs and its potential for growth. "What kind of schedule you thinking about?" asks one farmer. "And what would shipping cost for things like grain or livestock?" "Depends on demand and road conditions," Patterson replies practically. "But I'm thinking monthly runs to start, maybe more frequent if business justifies it. As for costs, we'd work out fair rates based on weight and value." Mrs. Henderson joins the conversation. "We'd need reliable delivery of coffee sugar flour and other staples. Having to wait weeks between supply runs hurts business and makes planning difficult." The young clerk looks up from his ledger. "Regular mail service would be valuable too. Communication with business partners and family back east is essential for maintaining connections and conducting affairs." This impromptu business meeting illustrates how frontier communities seized opportunities for improvement and growth. The prospect of regular freight service represented a chance to reduce isolation, improve living standards, and create new economic opportunities that could benefit everyone. The main street of the town is covered with fine red dust that rises in small clouds with each footstep, creating a constant low-level fog that filters the morning sunlight and gives everything a warm amber cast that photographers would later try to capture but never quite duplicate. This dust isn't just an inconvenience to be endured, it's a fundamental fact of life that affects everything from the taste of food to the mechanics of breathing to the constant maintenance required to keep clothing equipment and buildings functional. Every surface, every building, every person carries a coating of this fine particulate matter that seems to regenerate itself overnight, regardless of efforts to sweep wash or brush it away. The dust works its way into the mechanisms of watches and guns, requiring constant cleaning and oiling to prevent malfunctions. It infiltrates food storage containers, making covered jars and sealed bins essential for anything meant to remain edible. It coats windows so regularly that cleaning them becomes a daily chore rather than a weekly one, and even then the glass never stays clear for long. In front of the Silver Spur Tavern, a row of horses are tied along the hitching rail, their tails swishing in a constant rhythmic battle against the ever-present flies that seem to thrive in this environment of dust heat and animal presence. These aren't the sleek, well-groomed horses of Hollywood westerns with their perfectly combed manes and shining coats, but working animals that show the honest wear and accumulated wisdom of hard use in challenging conditions. Their coats bear not just the dust of this morning's activities, but the accumulated patina of long travel over rough terrain. Their muscles speak to the constant demands of frontier transportation, where roads were suggestions rather than engineered surfaces, and their patient-alert demeanor suggests animals that have learned to conserve energy for when it's truly needed, while remaining ready for sudden demands that might mean the difference between life and death. Each horse tells its own story through scars, brands, and the particular way it stands and moves. Some show the broad chest and sturdy build of farm horses bred for pulling heavy loads over long distances. Others display the lean musculature and alert posture of animals bred for speed and endurance over harsh terrain. A few bear the distinctive markings and conformation that suggest Indian breeding animals that have been traded or captured and now serve new masters in this complex cultural mixing ground where different traditions met and blended. Men in wide-brimmed hats, faded shirts and coats draped over their shoulders lean against the wooden pillars of the tavern's porch, creating an informal gathering that serves multiple social and economic functions simultaneously. They sip whiskey from their own bottles, not because the tavern doesn't serve drinks, but because bringing your own liquor was both economical and social. Allowing men to share premium spirits they might not be able to afford individually, while demonstrating trust and friendship through the act of sharing. But look more carefully at these men and you'll see they're not the romantic cowboys of popular imagination with their clean clothes, heroic poses, and noble bearing. Many bear the invisible but unmistakable psychological scars of a war that ended just months ago, their eyes holding the particular 1,000-yard stare of people who've witnessed too much death and destruction in too short a time. Some wear pieces of faded blue or grey fabric, remnants of uniforms that once represented profound beliefs and loyalties, now repurposed as protection against the elements in a place where practicality trumped sentiment. Their conversations aren't about heroic adventures, grand ambitions, or the romantic possibilities of frontier life, but about the practical concerns that dominate daily existence, seasoned with the kind of gentle philosophical humor that helps soften the sharp edges of constant hardship. This humor isn't bitter or cynical, but reflective, the careful laughter of people who've learned to find absurdity in adversity and meaning in struggle. Johnson's thinking about winter already, one man comments gesturing with his bottle toward a figure down the street who's loading supplies onto a wagon with systematic care. Says he's taking no chances after last year's freeze caught him short and cost him half his livestock. Smart man. Another responds, taking a careful, measured sip of his whiskey. Lost more cattle to that February cold snap than we did to rustlers all last year. Nature's the real outlaw out here. Doesn't negotiate terms, doesn't show mercy for good intentions, and always collects what it's owed with interest and penalties for late payment. There's laughter at this observation, but it's the kind of knowing chuckle that acknowledges profound truth, rather than finding genuine humor in tragedy. These men understand from harsh experience that the real drama of frontier life isn't found in gunfights, gold rushes, or conflicts with outlaws, but in the constant, exhausting chess match against weather disease, economic uncertainty, and the simple bad luck that could destroy months or years of careful work in a single, violent afternoon. A third man, older and bearing the accumulated scars of decades of outdoor work, adds his weathered perspective while adjusting his hat against the strengthening sun. Of course, rustlers don't help the situation none either. Lost 6 head last month to men who figured taking someone else's property was easier than raising their own. But you can track rustlers and maybe get your stock back if you're lucky and persistent. Can't negotiate with a blizzard or make a deal with drought. This careful distinction between human and natural threats reveals the complex calculus of frontier survival that occupied everyone's thoughts constantly. Human problems, theft, fraud, violence, might be solved through law enforcement, community action, or individual response. Natural disasters simply had to be endured, prepared for as much as possible, and survived through planning, resilience, and the kind of community cooperation that could make the difference between life and death. A young woman emerges from the general store across the street, her dress practical rather than fashionable, with modifications that speak clearly to the unique demands of frontier life. The hem is shorter than Eastern fashion would dictate, allowing easier movement over rough terrain and reducing the constant problem of fabric dragging in dust and mud. The fabric itself is sturdy cotton or wool rather than delicate silk or fine linen chosen specifically for durability over appearance. Her dress shows other adaptations too. Reinforced seams that won't tear under stress, practical pockets for carrying essential items that might be needed throughout the day, and a cut that allows for the kind of physical work that frontier women perform daily. The colors are muted earth tones that won't show dust and stains as readily as lighter shades, and the overall effect is of clothing designed by someone who understood that survival took precedence over style. She carries a wicker basket that represents careful calculation of needs versus available funds, every item chosen for maximum utility and value. A sack of flour might be portioned out over several weeks, making bread and other necessities while serving multiple cooking purposes. A small piece of machinery or hardware might serve several functions around the homestead. Even simple items like needles, buttons, or thread were precious because replacement was uncertain and expensive. She nods to the men by the tavern, not flirtation or coquetry, but the automatic acknowledgement of neighbors in a community where everyone's survival depended on maintaining these social bonds and mutual support networks. In frontier communities, social isolation could be as dangerous as physical threats, cutting people off from the information, assistance, and cooperation that made survival possible. "Morning, Miss Clara." One of the men calls, touching his hat brim in a gesture that combines respect with genuine interest in her welfare and that of her family. "Your pa's leg healing up proper. Heard he took quite a fall when that horse spooked last month." "Coming along, thank you for asking," she responds, pausing for genuine conversation rather than mere politeness. "Doc says he should be walking without the crutch come summer, Lord willing, and the creek don't rise. He's been fretting about getting behind on his work, but neighbors have been good about helping out." This exchange illustrates perfectly the reality of frontier communities where everyone knew everyone else's business, not from idle curiosity or malicious gossip, but from practical necessity and genuine concern. In a place where a single family's misfortune could affect the entire community's stability and prosperity. Maintaining detailed awareness of neighbors' situations was a survival skill rather than social courtesy. The concern about her father's injury isn't idle curiosity but practical intelligence gathering. A man who couldn't work meant a family under financial and physical stress, which could affect their ability to pay debts, maintain their property, contribute to community projects, or provide assistance to others when needed. In the interconnected economy of frontier settlements, individual problems quickly became collective concerns that required community solutions. "Tell him Samuel Morris sends his regards," another man adds, removing his hat entirely in a gesture of deeper respect. "And if he needs help with anything heavy before he's back on his feet, proper, he should send word. Got boys who could use the work experience and the chance to learn from someone with his knowledge." This offer represents the complex web of mutual aid that made frontier survival possible for individual families while strengthening the entire community. Help offered today would be remembered and reciprocated when the Morris family faced their own inevitable difficulties. It wasn't charity in the condescending sense, but investment in community resilience that benefited everyone over time. Clara's acceptance of the offer is gracious but not surprised, suggesting this type of neighborly assistance was routine rather than exceptional. That's very kind, and I'll tell him. Truth is, we've got fence work that's been waiting since before his accident, and Ma's been worrying herself sick about getting it done before our stock wanders off and costs us money we can't afford to lose. The practical nature of this conversation, injury recovery work needs community assistance, illustrates how frontier life focused on immediate tangible concerns rather than abstract ideas or philosophical discussions. Philosophy and politics had their place in frontier communities, but survival needs took priority in daily interactions where time was precious and practical results mattered more than eloquent words. A freight wagon rumbles down the main street, its wheels creating small dust storms that everyone automatically steps away from with the practiced ease of people who've learned to accommodate their environment rather than fight it. The driver, weathered and competent exchanges nods with various townspeople. These brief interactions convey complex information, road conditions between settlements, news from other communities, the ongoing commerce that kept these isolated places connected to the wider world.
Any word from the capital? Someone calls to the driver.
Nothing official, he replies, but heard tell there's talk of new territorial appointments. Governor's supposed to be naming new judges and territorial officials soon. This news generates immediate interest. Changes in territorial government could affect land policies, taxation law enforcement, and the general business climate that determined whether frontier communities prospered or struggled. About time, one man comments. Been operating without proper courts for months makes it hard to settle disputes or conduct business when there's no legal authority to appeal to. The conversation reveals how frontier communities existed in a complex relationship with distant government authorities. They needed official institutions to provide stability and legal framework, but also valued the independence and self-reliance that came from being far from government interference. Inside the Silver Spur, the atmosphere shifts dramatically from the bright dustiness of the street to a cooler, dimmer environment that feels almost cave-like in its protection from the harsh exterior world. The temperature difference is immediately noticeable and welcome, providing blessed relief from the sun that was already growing uncomfortably warm despite the early hour. The smell hits you in complex waves as your senses adjust. Old wood, seasoned by years of tobacco smoke, spilled whiskey, and the accumulated presence of thousands of conversations. There's also the distinctive aroma of oil lamps, well-worn leather, and the particular mustiness that comes from a building that's never completely dry. Your eyes adjust slowly to the interior lighting, which comes primarily from two small windows and a single oil lamp hanging over the bar area. The lamp casts a warm golden circle of light that seems to draw people toward the bar, creating a natural social center within the larger space. The oak bar dominates one wall, its surface polished to a deep, rich sheen by years of use and countless conversations. The wood has achieved the kind of patina that only comes from decades of human contact. Glasses, set down arms leaned upon during intense discussions, hands drummed nervously during difficult negotiations. Behind the bar shelves hold a modest but carefully selected collection of bottles, primarily whiskey of various qualities. Each bottle represents not just the cost of the liquor itself, but the expense and difficulty of transporting fragile glass containers across hundreds of miles of rough terrain where breakage was constant threat, and replacement might be impossible for months. The bartender, moves with efficient grace his graying hair and weathered hands, speaking to years of physical labor before he took on this role. He wipes glasses with practiced efficiency, while keeping one ear tuned to the various conversations around him, occasionally making subtle adjustments to better observe different areas of the room. In the corner, a piano sits silent in the morning light, waiting patiently for evening, when the day's work would be done, and men would need distraction from their troubles, their loneliness, and their memories of places and people left behind. The instrument shows clear signs of hard use and careful maintenance. Several keys have been replaced with ones that don't quite match, but someone has kept it tuned and functional. Round tables scattered throughout the room host various groups, each absorbed in conversations that blend essential business with desperately needed social connection. The tables themselves tell stories through their accumulated damage, marked by countless glasses and bottles, scarred by spurs and belt buckles, stained by spilled drinks. At one table near the window, 3 men discuss agricultural prospects with the intense concentration of generals planning a military campaign. Because in many ways, that's exactly what they're doing. Plotting strategy against an environment that gives no quarter to poor planning and shows no mercy for mistakes. Wheat should do well if we get adequate rain in May. One man says studying the coffee grounds in the bottom of his cup as if they might reveal the future. But corn's a serious gamble with water this short already. Might be better to stick with crops that don't need as much moisture. Everything's a gamble out here. Another responds with the philosophical acceptance that characterized successful frontier thinking. Question is whether you're gambling on your own judgment and experience or trusting somebody else's promises about weather prices or market conditions. The third man nods toward the bar where newspapers from various settlements are displayed for customers to read. Speaking of promises and predictions, heard Peterson's thinking seriously about selling out to that cattle syndicate from Denver. Big money, they say, more than his place is worth locally. This news carries significant weight in the small room, causing other conversations to pause as people listen for details that might affect their own situations. The sale of an established homestead to outside interests affects property values, community stability, and the delicate social fabric that keeps frontier settlements functioning. Peterson's got his reasons, I suppose. The first man acknowledges with careful neutrality. Lost his oldest boy to fever last winter, and his wife's been wanting to move closer to her sister in Kansas ever since. Sometimes a man reaches the point where continuing the struggle isn't worth the potential reward. At another table, 2 men play cards with slow, thoughtful deliberation, understanding that the game is really just an excuse for social connection and conversation in a world where loneliness could be as dangerous as any physical threat. Their stakes are appropriately small, coins that represent the difference between minor comfort and mild privation rather than dramatic wealth or devastating poverty. You hear anything from your boy in California recently? One player asks as he considers his hand the question, carrying the particular weight of parental concern that transcends all historical periods and geographical locations. Letter last month. In Lee comes the reply delivered with careful neutrality. Says the mining's decent when he can get work, but the prices for everything basic are pure highway robbery. $2 for a pound of flour, $3 for a bottle of whiskey, if you can believe such nonsense. Supply and demand. The first man responds with economic wisdom learned through hard experience rather than formal education. Same principle everywhere, just more extreme out there. What's scarce gets expensive. What's common gets cheap. The humor in this observation draws knowing chuckles from nearby tables, demonstrating how frontier communities valued wit and wisdom almost as much as physical strength and practical skills. The ability to find laughter in difficult circumstances was a survival skill that helped maintain morale during inevitable periods of hardship and loss. A young man sits alone at a corner table nursing a beer, and writing with careful precision in a leather-bound ledger, his concentration suggesting this isn't casual correspondence, but important record-keeping that requires absolute accuracy. The quality of his attention indicates this might be business accounts that must be perfect for legal reasons, debts that must be documented to avoid disputes, or perhaps detailed letters to family back east. The bartender approaches your table with a coffee pot, the gesture automatic and welcoming. "Coffee's fresh as we get out here," he says with a slight smile that acknowledges the limitations of frontier life without apologizing for them. Which means it was roasted sometime this month and ground this morning with whatever equipment we could manage to keep working. This self-deprecating humor about frontier conditions was typical of successful frontier communities, acknowledging shortcomings and limitations while maintaining dignity and even finding genuine amusement in hardship. Coffee, even imperfect coffee prepared under difficult conditions, represented civilization and comfort in a place where both were precious commodities. As you sip the strong, slightly bitter brew, you begin to observe the tavern's role extending far beyond just providing drinks and simple meals. It functions as an informal news center where information gets synthesized and shared among people who need to stay informed about changing conditions that might affect their safety, prosperity, or survival. The establishment serves as a place where informal banking occurs, as debts are negotiated, partnerships formed, and business deals discussed away from the official constraints of formal institutions that might not understand frontier conditions. It operates as a social club where isolated men can remember they're part of a larger community with shared interests and mutual obligations. The peaceful, productive atmosphere of the tavern shifts subtly when two men at a table near the window begin speaking in voices that gradually rise above the general murmur of conversation. This isn't the sudden explosion of violence depicted in Hollywood westerns where conflict erupts without warning and resolves through gunplay, but rather the slow burn of a serious dispute between neighbors who must continue living in the same small community, regardless of how their disagreement ultimately resolves. Both men show the careful self-control of people who understand that reputation matters enormously in places where everyone knows everyone else's business capabilities and character. Their rising voices aren't the result of drunken belligerence. It's barely past noon, and both men display the measured restraint of people who know that how they handle conflict will be remembered, discussed, and judged for months or even years to come. I'm telling you, Harrison, that water boundary we agreed on last spring has shifted significantly. The first man says, his voice tight with controlled frustration that speaks to weeks or months of growing concern about a problem that affects his family's survival. Drought moved the creek bed east by 20 yards, maybe more, and now you're claiming grassland that's been mined for 3 years running. Matthews is a lean man with the permanently weathered hands and patient demeanor of someone who's spent years coaxing crops from reluctant soil and understanding that nature gives nothing easily. His complaint isn't delivered with anger or theatrical drama, but with the bone-deep weariness of someone who's watched his livelihood slowly disappear through circumstances entirely beyond his control. His voice carries the strain of a man who's already lost more than he can afford and sees himself being pushed toward complete ruin by a situation that seems to have no fair solution. The careful way he phrases his words suggests he's been thinking about this conversation for a long time, choosing his arguments carefully and hoping to find a resolution that doesn't destroy essential community relationships. Harrison Stockier. And with the confident bearing of someone whose operations have been more successful in recent years, leans back in his chair, but maintains steady eye contact that suggests he's not intimidated, but also not eager for confrontation. Creek's always been the legal boundary between our properties, Matthews. Survey maps from the territorial office show the water as the dividing line, not some imaginary line drawn on paper. If it moved natural like during the drought, that's God's will, and natural law not my doing or responsibility. The philosophical acceptance in Harrison's response reflects frontier attitudes toward natural forces and legal property rights, but also reveals the potential for seemingly reasonable positions to create irreconcilable conflicts when individual survival is at stake. His calm demeanor and reference to legal documentation suggest he's confident in his position and prepared to defend it through official channels if necessary. This conversation immediately captures the attention of other patrons throughout the tavern, not because violence seems imminent, but because property disputes affected the entire community's stability and everyone's long-term prosperity. In a place where land ownership meant survival and boundary disputes could escalate beyond the individuals involved, potentially dividing neighbors and disrupting the cooperation that made frontier life possible, everyone had a stake in peaceful resolution. The bartender continues wiping glasses with deliberate motions, but his movements become more focused and his attention more concentrated on the developing situation. He's clearly seen these discussions before, understands how quickly reasonable men can reach unreasonable conclusions when their families' futures hang in the balance, and knows that intervention might become necessary to prevent permanent damage to community relationships. Other conversations don't stop abruptly, but they quiet enough for people to listen while appearing not to eavesdrop. This isn't entertainment for bored spectators seeking drama to break the monotony of frontier routine. It's serious community business that might require witness testimony, mediation services, or collective problem solving if the two men can't reach a private resolution that satisfies both parties, natural or not. Matthews continues, his voice carrying the increasing strain of a man who's watched his options narrow to desperate measures. I've got cattle that need that grass to survive. Lost half my herd to blackleg disease this spring. Took them faster than I could separate the sick from the healthy ones. Can't spare what's left of the good grazing, especially with winter feed to consider, and no money to buy hay if the situation gets worse. This revelation completely transforms the nature of the dispute from a simple boundary disagreement between stubborn neighbors to a survival crisis that threatens to destroy a family's entire future. Matthews isn't being greedy, unreasonable, or deliberately contentious. He's fighting desperately for his family's continued existence in a place where failure meant not just financial ruin, but potential starvation or forced abandonment of everything they'd worked to build. Disease outbreaks that decimated livestock were catastrophic events that could destroy years of careful work, prudent planning, and backbreaking labor in a matter of weeks, leaving families financially ruined and struggling to rebuild from nothing. The frontier was littered with abandoned homesteads where disease, weather, economic disaster, or simple bad luck had defeated families who'd invested everything they had in their dreams of Western prosperity. The other men in the tavern understand this desperation intimately because they've all faced similar crises, watched neighbors suffer through them, or lived in constant fear that the next disaster would strike their own operations. The knowledge that any of them could face identical circumstances creates a community of shared vulnerability that usually encouraged mutual support and understanding. Harrison's expression softens slightly as he processes this new information, his rigid defensiveness giving way to genuine concern for a neighbor's welfare. He's clearly not a cruel or heartless man, just someone protecting his own family's interests in a world where excessive generosity could quickly become fatal weakness. Didn't know about your herd loss, Matthews. Blackleg's a terrible thing to watch, and I'm sorry for your trouble. But I can't give up land that's rightfully mine according to legal surveys, especially with my own stock to worry about and commodity prices uncertain like they've been. Two men now stand slowly from their chairs, their movement deliberate and careful, rather than threatening or aggressive. This isn't the dramatic confrontation of Western films where violence erupts suddenly and resolves conflicts permanently, but the measured ritual of neighbors who need to resolve a serious dispute while preserving their ability to function as community members afterward. The tavern's atmosphere grows tense, but it's the tension of people hoping earnestly for peaceful resolution rather than anticipating or wanting violence. Most of these men had seen enough bloodshed during the recent war to last several lifetimes, and they strongly preferred solutions that didn't require anyone to die, be permanently injured, or create lasting feuds that would divide the community for generations. Maybe we should ride out and take a careful look at that boundary together. Matthews suggests his tone shifting deliberately toward negotiation, as he recognizes that escalation serves no one's long-term interests. With neutral witnesses who can see the situation clearly and help us find a solution that doesn't require either of us to lose what we can't afford to give up. Harrison nods slowly, understanding that accepting this proposal demonstrates his willingness to be reasonable while also protecting his legitimate interests through proper procedures. That's fair talking, Matthews. When would suit your schedule? This afternoon if you're willing and the weather holds. Natural light's better for surveying boundary markers accurately, and we can ask Miller to come along. He knows that creek as well as anyone in the county, and he's got no financial stake in the outcome beyond seeing neighbors treat each other right and maintain community peace. The tension in the room begins to ease noticeably as both men demonstrate their clear preference for resolution over confrontation through established community procedures. This approach to conflict resolution was typical of successful frontier communities, recognizing that violence was too costly for settlements that couldn't afford to lose productive members or create permanent divisions that would undermine the cooperative relationships essential for survival. One of the men reaches for his coat hanging on a wooden peg near their table, the gesture deliberate and measured. "Let's go outside and settle this proper," he says, but his tone and overall manner suggest surveying and careful negotiation rather than fighting or any form of physical confrontation. The phrase "settle this proper" carries particular meaning in frontier communities, resolving disputes through recognized processes that leave both parties able to maintain their dignity and continue functioning as neighbors. The atmosphere in the tavern falls completely silent for a moment, everyone listening intently for clues about how this potentially dangerous situation will develop. Several customers shift in their chairs, ready to intervene if needed, but hoping earnestly that their involvement won't become necessary. The collective tension reflects the community's understanding that individual conflicts could easily escalate into broader divisions that would weaken everyone's security. The bartender steps forward slightly, his movement subtle but significant in its demonstration of community leadership. "Gentlemen, if you're heading out to look at boundaries in this heat, might want to take some water along. Sun's getting fierce already, and clear thinking requires clear heads and comfortable bodies." This gentle intervention provides both men with a graceful transition period and a cooling off opportunity while acknowledging the wisdom of their proposed solution. Frontier communities had developed these social mechanisms: indirect suggestions, face-saving alternatives, gentle redirections, specifically to defuse tensions before they reach dangerous levels that could permanently damage essential relationships. Both men pause thoughtfully, recognizing the bartender's offer of respect and practical advice. Matthews nods, first his gesture acknowledging both the suggestion and the social support being offered. Good thinking. This is business between neighbors who have to keep living next to each other, not a blood feud over ancient wrongs or matters of honor. Harrison agrees readily, his relief evident. Business is exactly right. No sense making permanent enemies over something we can measure accurately, discuss reasonably, and settle according to what's fair and legal. As they prepare to leave, other patrons begin resuming their conversations. but with a subtle shift toward community problem-solving rather than individual concerns. Someone offers to loan a surveying chain for accurate measurement. Another suggests consulting the Territorial Land Office records to clarify the original boundary descriptions. A third mentions a similar dispute resolved successfully the previous year through exactly this kind of cooperative approach. The young man in the corner closes his ledger carefully and approaches the bar. "Mind if I tag along?" he asks Matthews and Harrison politely. "I've got surveying experience from my time with the Army engineers during the war. Might be useful to have someone measure things proper who's not financially invested in either outcome. This offer represents another important frontier value, the essential role of neutral expertise in resolving disputes fairly." The young man's military background gives his offer immediate credibility, while his lack of local ties and financial interests makes him acceptable to both parties as an impartial observer and technical expert. "That would be greatly appreciated." Matthews responds with genuine gratitude. More witnesses means less chance of disagreement later about what we found or how the measurements were taken. Harrison nods agreement enthusiastically. "Fair witnesses make for fair solutions. We'd be obliged for your professional help." Leaving the tavern with the sound of reasonable men solving serious problems through discussion and community cooperation, rather than violence, you follow the main street toward the rhythmic ring of hammer on anvil that has been providing a steady beat throughout the morning, like the heartbeat of the community itself, a sound that speaks to industry progress and the transformation of raw materials into useful tools. The blacksmith shop sits at the strategic edge of the town's business district, positioned where the smoke noise and fire hazards won't disturb other activities, but close enough for easy access by townspeople and the constant stream of travelers who depend on metalwork for basic survival in this harsh environment, where metal tools mean the difference between success and failure. The sound grows steadily louder as you approach, not just the primary rhythm of hammer on anvil, but the complex symphony of secondary sounds that speak to the incredible complexity of the work being performed. The sharp hiss of hot metal meeting water during tempering, the steady creak of bellows providing consistent airflow to maintain proper forge temperature, the careful scrape of files shaping metal to precise specifications, and the occasional ring of tongs against iron as pieces are positioned and repositioned for optimal heating and shaping. The blacksmith emerges from the smoky interior like a figure from ancient mythology, shirtless and covered in a sheen of sweat that makes his well-developed muscles gleam despite the relatively cool morning air. He hammers away at a set of horseshoes with the practiced rhythm of years, each strike precise and purposeful, with absolutely no wasted motion or energy. This efficiency isn't just superior craftsmanship, but stark economic necessity. In frontier communities, the blacksmith's time was constantly in demand from multiple customers, with urgent needs and delays in one project could cascade into serious problems for multiple families whose livelihoods depended on functioning equipment. A broken plowshare during critical planting season could mean a lost harvest and potential starvation. A lame horse could isolate a family from essential supplies and emergency medical care, potentially meaning death in serious situations. The forge glows with intense heat that seems to bend and distort the air around it, occasionally sending tiny sparks dancing through the workspace like fireflies in daylight. The temperature inside the shop must be almost unbearable, especially as the day grows warmer. But the blacksmith works with steady concentration that suggests complete adaptation to these extreme conditions through years of gradual acclimatization. The smell hits you in complex, overlapping waves as you approach the work area. Hot metal mixed with burning charcoal, well-oiled leather, and honest human sweat. It's not unpleasant, but primal in a way that reminds you how recently human civilization had moved beyond complete dependence on hand-forged tools and weapons. In 1865, especially on the frontier, where manufactured goods were expensive and often unavailable, the blacksmith wasn't just a skilled craftsman, but an absolutely essential cornerstone of any functioning community. Morning! The blacksmith calls without looking up from his work, his concentration never wavering, despite the social obligation to acknowledge visitors courteously. His voice carries the particular raspiness that comes from breathing forge smoke for years, and the rhythm of his hammering pauses just long enough for conversation before resuming with mechanical precision. Be with you in just a moment. Just finishing up these shoes for Peterson's mare. She's been favoring her right front foot something terrible, and Peterson's got an important trip to the county seat planned for next week. Can't have his horse going lame with all those miles to cover over rough terrain. Around the shop, displayed examples of the blacksmith's work demonstrate the incredible range of skills required for frontier life. Horseshoes, certainly in various sizes for different animals and specific uses, but also nails of different types and sizes, hinges for doors and gates, knife blades for kitchen and field use components for wagon wheels, farming implements, household items, and countless other pieces that kept a community functioning properly. Each item represents hours of careful work and specialized knowledge passed down through generations of metal workers who understood not just the techniques of shaping metal, but the specific requirements of dozens of different applications, the working properties of various iron sources, and the individual preferences of customers whose lives literally depended on the quality of his craftsmanship. Here there was some discussion over at the Silver Spur. The blacksmith comments casually as he tempers a horseshoe in a bucket of water that hisses and steams dramatically. His words seem offhand, but his tone suggests genuine interest rather than idle gossip. In small frontier communities, everyone had a stake in maintaining peace and resolving conflicts before they disrupted the delicate social balance that kept everyone alive and prosperous. Nothing that can't be worked out between reasonable men. You respond already learning to navigate frontier communication, where information was valuable currency, but discretion was essential for maintaining trust and social standing in a community where reputation mattered more than money. The blacksmith nods approvingly, his expression suggesting relief that violence hasn't erupted and optimism that community wisdom will prevail. Good to hear. Matthews is decent folk, just been having a terrible run of bad luck lately. Disease in his herd wife's been poorly with some kind of lingering sickness that won't break, and now this boundary dispute. Sometimes problems pile up on a man all at once like a landslide, and it takes all his strength just to keep standing. This casual sharing of personal information, delivered without malice or judgment, illustrates how frontier communities functioned as informal support networks where people knew each other's troubles, not from nosiness, but from genuine concern and the practical understanding that individual misfortune could affect everyone's welfare. Knowledge of neighbors' problems allowed the community to provide appropriate assistance and understanding during difficult times. Harrison's good people too. The blacksmith continues working the bellows to increase the forge's heat with steady, practiced motions. Just protecting what's his, which any sensible man would do in his position. Both of them are trying to do right by their families in a situation where there might not be enough rightness to go around for everyone to be satisfied. A young boy, perhaps 12 years old, with the serious demeanor of someone who's learned early that survival requires constant attention to detail, works the bellows with practiced timing that suggests months or years of experience. His job requires constant awareness. Too little air and the fire dies too much, and it burns too hot for proper metal work. The boy's concentration matches the blacksmith's, and their coordination speaks to a well-established apprenticeship relationship built on mutual respect and shared purpose. Tommy here has been working with me since his pa died in a mining accident last winter. The blacksmith explains, noticing your observation of their seamless partnership. Good hands for the work, and a head that remembers what he's taught. Should be ready to take over simple jobs by next winter, more complex work within a few years if he keeps applying himself. This casual mention of the boy's father's death and his subsequent integration into the blacksmith's household demonstrates frontier adaptations to tragedy that would seem remarkable by modern standards. Communities absorbed orphan children not just from charity but from practical necessity. Trained hands were valuable. Everyone deserved a chance to contribute to community welfare, and social stability required that tragedies not create permanent burdens on already strained resources. Tommy's got natural talent. The blacksmith continues ruffling the boy's hair with a hand that's permanently stained by forge work. Feel for metal temperature, steady hands, and the patience to do things right, even when he's tired or eager to finish. Can't teach those qualities. Either a person has them or they don't. A customer arrives leading a limping horse, and the blacksmith's attention immediately shifts to professional assessment with the focused concentration of someone who understands that accurate diagnosis is as important as skilled treatment. His examination is thorough but gentle, understanding that a lame horse could mean economic disaster for its owner, and that hasty conclusions could make problems worse rather than better. "Let's have a look at what's troubling you, girl," he says to the horse, moving around the animal with experienced eyes that can read subtle signs of pain, injury, or illness that others might miss completely. His hands explore the horse's leg with the sensitivity of someone who understands that touch can reveal information that visual inspection alone might miss. "Stone bruise looks like," he diagnoses after a careful examination of the horse's hoof and leg, his tone confident but not dismissive of the owner's concerns. "Nothing serious if we treat it right and give it time to heal proper. Keep her off hard ground for a week, apply these poultices I'll mix up for you, and she'll be sound as ever. Should be good as new in no time." The relief on the horse owner's face reveals how much depended on this professional opinion and treatment recommendation. A permanently lame horse would need to be replaced, a major expense that could affect a family's survival through the winter, their ability to work their land effectively, or their capacity to reach supplies and medical care when needed. "What do I owe you for the examination?" the customer asks, reaching for his wallet with the careful movements of someone who counts every expenditure and plans every purchase. "Nothing for looking and advising." The blacksmith replies without hesitation, his generosity reflecting frontier values about community mutual aid. "Just keep in mind who told you true when you need actual shoeing done, and maybe mention my name if anyone asks about reliable metal work." This informal economy of favors and future obligations was how frontier communities often operated when cash was scarce, but services were constantly needed. Present generosity created future business relationships, reputation served as a form of currency, and trust was built through consistent fair dealing over time rather than formal contracts or legal agreements. At the end of the main street stands the sheriff's office, a modest wooden building that manages to project considerable authority despite its humble size and obviously recent construction. The structure itself tells the complete story of a community that has grown beyond the informal social controls of a small settlement and now requires the formal institutions of organized law enforcement to maintain order and justice in an increasingly complex social environment. A simple sign reading "Sheriff" hangs beside the door, painted in black letters on white wood, that shows careful maintenance despite constant exposure to weather conditions that quickly deteriorate anything not properly cared for. The building itself shows clear signs of thoughtful construction, proper stone foundations that will last for generations, quality lumber that speaks to significant investment and attention to architectural details. that suggest the community put considerable resources into creating a visible symbol of stability and legal order. Several wanted posters attacked to a board beside the door, featuring formal photographs rather than the artistic renderings of earlier eras when photography was less accessible. These studio portraits show men who look more like failed farmers, unsuccessful businessmen, or desperate laborers than the romantic outlaws of popular imagination. Their crimes detailed in careful legal language that suggests official documentation and legal proceedings speak to the mundane realities of frontier lawlessness, cattle theft that could bankrupt entire families, armed robbery that threatened the economic foundation of small communities, fraud that exploited the trust essential for frontier business, and occasional violence born from desperation rather than dramatic evil or criminal ambition. The rewards offered, several $100s in some cases, represent substantial sums that speak to both the seriousness of these crimes and the community's willingness to invest significant resources in pursuing justice and maintaining order. These amounts could represent months of wages for working men, suggesting that effective law enforcement was considered essential rather than optional for frontier prosperity and community development. The office door stands slightly ajar, and through the gap you can see Sheriff Coleman, hat pulled low over his eyes, leaning back in a wooden chair as he reads what appears to be official correspondence with the careful attention of someone who understands that details often matter more than dramatic gestures in effective law enforcement. His manner suggests intense concentration rather than casual relaxation, and occasionally he glances out into the street with the automatic vigilance of someone who has learned through experience that trouble often announces itself through subtle changes in routine patterns of community activity, rather than obvious dramatic events that draw immediate attention. Sheriff Coleman represents neither the heroic lawman of romantic fiction nor the corrupt official of cynical tales, but something more complex and realistic, a practical man trying to maintain order and justice in a place where formal legal structures are still developing, and where personal relationships often matter more than abstract principles when it comes to resolving conflicts and maintaining peace between neighbors who must continue living together. His gun is visible but not prominent position for practical access, rather than intimidation or display of authority. The weapon clearly represents a tool of his profession rather than a symbol of power, and his comfortable familiarity with it suggests military or law enforcement experience gained elsewhere before arriving in this frontier community to take on the challenging job of maintaining order in a place where the nearest backup might be days away. A gentle knock on the doorframe announces your presence, and the sheriff looks up with the careful assessment of someone who has learned to read people quickly and accurately through years of experience dealing with all types of individuals. First impressions could reveal important information about intentions, capabilities, and potential threats that might not become obvious through casual conversation or extended observation. "Morning," he says, setting aside his papers with deliberate courtesy that suggests genuine interest in community members rather than mere professional obligation. "What can I do for you today?" The office interior is deliberately Spartan but highly functional, designed for efficiency and practical law enforcement rather than comfort or impressive display. A sturdy desk holds neat stacks of papers, correspondence with other law enforcement agencies throughout the territory, and what appears to be a detailed logbook where official business is recorded with the precision required for potential legal proceedings and court appearances. 2 cells in the back are currently empty but obviously clean and well maintained, suggesting they're used more for cooling off drunks and holding suspects awaiting trial than housing dangerous long-term prisoners. The cells represent the authority of law without suggesting that the community expects constant violent crime or maintains a large criminal population that requires permanent incarceration. just getting to know the town and the people who keep it running smoothly? You explain, and the sheriff nods with understanding that suggests this type of introduction is both common and welcomed by local authorities who understand the value of community connections. Good policy for anyone planning to stay around for any length of time, he responds approvingly. Town's growing steady, but it's still small enough that everybody knows everybody else's business, their capabilities, and their character. Makes my job easier in some ways, considerably harder in others when personal relationships complicate legal matters. This observation reveals the double-edged nature of small community law enforcement, where serious crimes were difficult to hide, but personal conflicts and family disputes could escalate quickly when people couldn't escape each other's company or start fresh somewhere else without abandoning significant investments in land and community relationships. A man enters carrying a formal complaint that perfectly illustrates the complexity of frontier law enforcement beyond the simple good versus evil scenarios of popular fiction. Sheriff, I need to report livestock damage that's been going on for several weeks now. He says, hat in hand, but voice determined. Someone's cattle got into my wheat field again last night. Third time this month, and I'm losing money I simply can't afford to lose, with harvest coming and debts to pay. Sheriff Coleman reaches for a standardized form, his response suggesting this type of complaint represents routine business, rather than unusual crisis requiring dramatic action. Same cattle as the previous incidents, Mr. Jenkins. Same herd, different section of fence down each time. Either someone's not maintaining their barriers proper like they're supposed to, or they're being cut deliberate-like to let stock wander onto my property and eat my crops. The sheriff makes careful notes with handwriting that will remain legible if the case eventually requires court proceedings or legal documentation. I'll ride out this afternoon, examine the damage and the fence line, personally talk to the stock owners about their responsibilities. Meanwhile, you document everything carefully, how much wheat was destroyed, what it would cost to replace time spent on repairs and cleanup. This methodical approach to property disputes demonstrates how frontier law enforcement often functioned more like professional mediation than criminal prosecution. The goal was resolving conflicts fairly and maintaining community peace, rather than punishing wrongdoing dramatically or establishing legal precedents that might affect future cases. After Jenkins leaves, apparently satisfied with the sheriff's response, Sheriff Coleman explains his philosophy and methods to you with the openness of someone who takes pride in his professional approach. Biggest challenge out here isn't outlaws or gunfighters like people back east. Imagine from those sensational newspaper stories, it's neighbors who can't get along properly. Put people under financial stress, give them access to weapons, add some alcohol and hot tempers, and you've got serious trouble brewing that can tear a community apart, if not handled careful-like. The reality of frontier law enforcement was indeed more mundane than popular culture suggests. Most of a sheriff's time was spent on property disputes, domestic conflicts, public intoxication, and occasional traveling troublemakers, rather than pursuing dangerous criminals across dramatic landscapes or engaging in heroic gunfights that resolved conflicts permanently. Of course, we do get genuine bad actors occasionally. He continues gesturing toward the wanted posters outside. Cattle rustlers mostly, or confidence men who figure they can disappear into the territory and start fresh somewhere else without paying their debts or answering for crimes committed back east. A telegraph message arrives delivered by a young man from the communications office down the street who's breathing hard from running in the heat. The sheriff reads the message with growing attention, his expression shifting from routine business to serious concern that immediately changes the office atmosphere. Bank robbery in Millerville yesterday morning. He announces, looking up from the message with professional alertness. 3 men, well armed and mounted on good horses, heading west according to witnesses. description matches some fellows who've been working this region for months, hitting small towns and disappearing into the wilderness. This news transforms the office atmosphere from routine business to potential crisis preparation. The sheriff immediately begins organizing a coordinated response, checking weapons, systematically reviewing emergency procedures, and preparing to send warnings to neighboring communities about the approaching threat. As you leave the sheriff's office with warnings about possible trouble echoing in your mind, you find yourself drawn toward the general store, a substantial wooden building that clearly serves as the commercial heart of this frontier community. The structure itself is larger than most others in town, its broad front porch, lined with barrels, boxes, and farming implements that speak to the incredible diversity of goods required for frontier survival. The store represents far more than simple commerce. It functions as a crucial lifeline connecting this isolated settlement to the broader world of manufactured goods, imported luxuries, and essential supplies that make the difference between mere survival and something approaching genuine prosperity. In a place where the nearest large city might be hundreds of miles away over dangerous terrain, the general store serves as warehouse, bank, post office, news center, and social hub, all rolled into one essential institution. The wooden sign above the entrance reads, Morrison's General Merchandise, in letters painted with careful attention to both visibility and durability. Someone has invested considerable time and expense in creating attractive professional signage that suggests this business operates with serious commercial ambitions, rather than the temporary, opportunistic trading posts that often characterized boom towns expecting to disappear when resources were exhausted or opportunities shifted elsewhere. Through the large windows, real glass carefully maintained, despite the expense and difficulty of replacement, you can see shelves packed with an incredible variety of items arranged with the systematic organization of someone who understands that efficient access to inventory can mean the difference between profit and loss in a business serving customers with urgent specific needs. Heavy wooden barrels positioned strategically around the porch contain different types of flour, sugar, salt, and other bulk staples that form the foundation of frontier nutrition. These aren't luxury items, but absolute necessities that must be available consistently, or families could face genuine hardship during periods when supply wagons were delayed by weather, road conditions, or various dangers that made transportation irregular and unreliable. A collection of farming tools, plows, hoes, axes, and harvesting implements stands propped against the building's wall, their worn surfaces speaking to hard use and careful maintenance, rather than decorative display. Each tool represents a significant investment for farming families operating on thin financial margins, and their presence here suggests the store serves as repair center and equipment exchange, as well as simple retail establishment. The familiar sound of the door's bell announces your entrance into an interior space that seems almost magically larger than the building's external dimensions would suggest. This optical illusion results from careful organization and efficient use of every available square foot of space, with shelves extending from floor to ceiling and goods arranged with mathematical precision that maximizes storage while maintaining accessibility for both customers and store employees. The smell inside creates a complex olfactory map of frontier commerce. Leather goods mixed with preserved foods, tobacco products, medicinal herbs, cleaning supplies, fabric softeners, metal tools, and the particular mustiness that comes from buildings where dozens of different materials and substances are stored together in close proximity for extended periods without climate control. Behind the main counter stands Mr. Morrison himself, a man whose appearance suggests someone who has learned to balance the competing demands of frontier hospitality with shrewd business sense necessary for commercial survival in a place where credit decisions could mean the difference between prosperity and bankruptcy. His weathered hands and patient demeanor speak to years of experience dealing with customers whose financial situations ranged from prosperous to desperate, and who might need everything from luxury items to emergency supplies that could save their lives. Good morning. He greets you with genuine warmth that suggests both professional courtesy and personal interest in every customer who enters his establishment. What brings you in today? Need any supplies for your stay in town, or perhaps looking for something particular that's hard to find out here? His question reveals the careful balance between helpful service and practical business assessment that characterize successful frontier merchants. Understanding each customer's specific needs allowed him to provide appropriate assistance while avoiding the waste of time and energy that could occur from pursuing sales unlikely to materialize or suggesting items customers couldn't afford. A careful examination of the store's inventory reveals the incredible complexity of frontier supply chains and the remarkable challenge of maintaining adequate stock in dozens of different categories when transportation was irregular, expensive, and subject to constant disruption from weather, road conditions, or various dangers that made commercial transportation a constant gamble. Food supplies occupy multiple shelves and storage areas ranging from basic staples like flour, sugar, salt, and dried beans to more exotic items like canned goods, preserved fruits, coffee, tea, and spices that represented significant luxury for families accustomed to monotonous diets based on whatever they could grow, hunt, or preserve locally. The presence of these imported foods speaks to the store's success in maintaining supply relationships with distant distributors despite the challenges of frontier commerce. Clothing sections display both ready-made garments and raw materials for home production, recognizing that frontier families needed options for both immediate replacement of damaged items and long-term clothing production that could save money while providing better fit and durability. Bolts of sturdy fabric, spools of thread, needles, buttons, and other sewing supplies occupy as much space as finished clothing, suggesting that many customers preferred to create their own garments when time and skill permitted. Hardware sections contain a bewildering array of metal goods, nails, screws, hinges, locks, chains, wire, and countless other items that kept frontier buildings' equipment and machinery functioning despite constant wear and the absence of specialized repair services. Each piece of hardware represented potential solutions to problems that could arise suddenly and require immediate attention to prevent minor inconveniences from becoming major disasters. Medical supplies occupy a carefully organized section that speaks to the reality of frontier life, where professional medical care might be days away, and families needed to treat everything from minor injuries to serious illnesses using whatever remedies and equipment they could obtain from commercial sources. Bandages, antiseptics, pain medications, and various patent medicines shared space with medical implements and reference books that helped non-professionals provide emergency care. A customer enters seeking ammunition for hunting, and Morrison's response reveals another crucial function of frontier general stores, serving as informal armorer and ammunition supplier for communities where hunting provided essential protein and self-defense required reliable weapons and adequate supplies. His knowledge of different cartridge types, powder charges, and bullet weights demonstrates the specialized expertise required for successful frontier commerce. Need anything particular for hunting or just general supplies? Morrison asks the customer, while retrieving boxes of ammunition from a locked cabinet behind the counter. The security measures reflect both the value of ammunition and community concerns about keeping potentially dangerous items away from unauthorized access, especially during periods when tensions might be elevated or strangers with questionable intentions might be present. The customer's request for specific ammunition types leads to a detailed discussion about hunting conditions, animal migration patterns, and optimal equipment choices that reveals how frontier merchants functioned as informal consultants and advisors whose knowledge could significantly affect their customers' success or failure in essential activities like food procurement, equipment maintenance, and seasonal preparation. The conversation also illustrates how general stores served as information exchanges, where knowledge about game populations, weather patterns, trail conditions, and market prices was shared among community members who needed constantly updated intelligence about changing conditions that affected their daily decisions and long-term planning. Behind the counter, Morrison maintains detailed ledgers that record not just sales and inventory, but complex credit arrangements, seasonal purchasing patterns, and customer preferences that allow him to anticipate needs and maintain adequate supplies of items essential for community welfare. These records represent sophisticated business management that rivals anything found in more established commercial centers. A young woman enters looking for fabric suitable for children's clothing, and Morrison's immediate shift to discussing patterns, durability, and seasonal appropriateness demonstrates how successful frontier merchants needed expertise in dozens of specialized areas to serve customers whose needs range from basic survival to quality of life improvements that made harsh frontier conditions more bearable. The transaction also reveals the social aspects of general store operations, where shopping wasn't just commercial activity but social interaction that provided isolated frontier residents with opportunities for conversation, community connection, and information exchange that help maintain the social bonds essential for frontier survival. Following Morrison's directions to see how real frontier families live, you find yourself walking along a well-worn path that leads away from the town center toward the scattered homesteads, where the majority of this area's population actually makes their living from the land itself rather than from the commercial and service activities that support agricultural production. The path winds through landscape that tells the complete story of human adaptation to challenging environmental conditions. Natural prairie grass giving way gradually to cultivated fields where families have invested years of backbreaking labor in transforming wild land into productive agricultural space that could support human settlement and provide surplus crops for trade and sale. Fence lines mark property boundaries with remarkable precision despite being constructed entirely from materials available locally. Split rails, stone posts, and native timber arranged with careful attention to both functionality and longevity. These boundaries represent far more than simple property division. They embody years of legal negotiation, community cooperation, and individual investment in creating permanent settlement rather than temporary exploitation of natural resources. The first homestead you encounter sits in a small valley protected from prevailing winds by natural ridges that reduce soil erosion and create favorable microclimates for agricultural production. The placement reveals sophisticated understanding of local geography, weather patterns, and agricultural principles that allowed families to maximize their chances of success in an environment where poor location decisions could mean disaster regardless of how hard people worked or how carefully they planned. The main house demonstrates frontier architecture at its most practical and efficient. A log structure with careful attention to weatherproofing, insulation, and durability that reflects years of gradual improvement and expansion as the family's prosperity and size increased over time. What began as a single-room cabin has grown through systematic additions into a substantial dwelling that could accommodate multiple generations while providing workspace for essential domestic activities. The logs themselves tell stories of frontier resourcefulness and community cooperation, some cut and shaped with professional precision that suggests skilled craftsmen, others showing the honest irregularities of work performed by families learning construction skills through necessity and experience rather than formal training. Chinking between logs has been maintained and renewed regularly, creating weatherproofing that keeps interior spaces comfortable despite extreme outdoor conditions. A substantial stone chimney dominates one end of the building, its construction representing considerable investment in materials and skilled labor that speaks to the family's commitment to permanent settlement rather than temporary residence. The chimney's size and design suggest it serves multiple functions: heating, cooking, and occasional metalworking that allows families to maintain equipment and create essential items without depending entirely on outside services. Outbuildings arranged around the main house reveal the incredible complexity of frontier agricultural operations that required specialized spaces for different activities essential to family survival and economic success. A barn large enough to shelter livestock and store feed tools and equipment represents the family's largest single investment after the house itself, and its condition suggests careful maintenance that protects valuable assets from weather damage. A smaller building serves as smokehouse for meat preservation, its carefully controlled ventilation and seasoned wood walls creating conditions necessary for transforming fresh meat into preserved products that could be stored safely for months without refrigeration. This capability meant the difference between feast and famine during periods when hunting was unsuccessful, or livestock losses reduced fresh meat availability. Root cellars dug into hillsides provide temperature-controlled storage for vegetables, fruits, and other foods that required protection from freezing temperatures in winter and excessive heat in summer. These underground storage spaces represent sophisticated understanding of food preservation principles and considerable investment in manual labor to create reliable food security systems. The sound of children's voices draws your attention to a family working together in fields where the morning's planting activities are proceeding with the systematic efficiency of people who understand that timing could determine whether the year's crop succeeds or fails. Each family member, regardless of age, participates in work appropriate to their physical capabilities and skill level, creating collaborative effort that maximizes productivity while teaching essential skills to the next generation. Mrs. Sarah Mitchell looks up from her work directing the children's activities, her smile warm despite the obvious fatigue that comes from rising before dawn to begin the endless round of tasks that keep frontier families fed, clothed, and housed through seasonal cycles that test human endurance and ingenuity. Her appearance suggests someone who has learned to find satisfaction in useful work while maintaining dignity and grace despite physical demands that would challenge anyone. "Good morning," she calls, removing work gloves to offer a handshake that demonstrates both frontier hospitality and the confidence that comes from successfully meeting countless challenges through individual effort and community cooperation. "You must be the gentleman staying at Henderson's boarding house." Word travels fast in a place this size, and new faces are always worth getting acquainted with. Her greeting illustrates perfectly the frontier balance between privacy and community awareness that allowed families to maintain independence while building social networks essential for mutual support during emergencies, collaborative work projects, and the simple human interaction that makes isolated life bearable and meaningful. "I'm Sarah Mitchell, and this is our place." She continues gesturing toward the homestead with obvious pride that comes from years of successful labor invested in creating something substantial and permanent from raw land and limited resources. Been here 6 years now, and we're finally starting to see returns on all the work we've put into clearing, planting, and building what you see around us. Her casual mention of the 6-year timeline reveals the reality of frontier agricultural development that required years of investment before families could expect their land to provide adequate income for comfortable survival, much less prosperity that would justify the enormous risks and hardships involved in frontier settlement. 3 children work alongside their mother, with the focused attention of young people who understand that family survival depends on everyone contributing according to their abilities, and that seasonal work must be completed regardless of weather conditions, personal preferences, or competing activities that might seem more interesting or entertaining. 10-year-old Emily carefully plants seeds with spacing and depth that suggests careful instruction and considerable practice. Her movements showing the kind of precision that comes from understanding that wasted seeds mean reduced harvest and potential hunger during winter months, when stored food must sustain the family through periods when fresh production is impossible. 8-year-old James carries water with obvious pride in his ability to contribute meaningfully to essential family work. His careful attention to avoiding spills, demonstrating awareness that every drop counts in a place where water sources might be distant, and time spent fetching water could be used for other essential activities. 6-year-old Mary collects rocks from planting areas with the systematic thoroughness of someone who understands that stones left in soil could damage equipment, reduce crop yields, or create hazards during harvesting activities. Her work might seem simple, but it represents essential preparation that affects the success of more complex activities. The family's work rhythm reveals sophisticated understanding of agricultural timing, weather patterns, and seasonal cycles that allow frontier families to maximize productivity while minimizing risks associated with planting too early or too late in growing seasons, where mistakes could mean disaster for families operating without financial reserves to survive crop failures. Children learn early out here. Sarah explains, noticing your observation of their focused work. Not because we don't value childhood, but because understanding how to provide for yourself and contribute to family welfare teaches lessons about responsibility, planning, and cooperation that serve people well regardless of what direction their lives eventually take. Her philosophical approach to child rearing reflects frontier values that emphasized practical skills and character development over formal education that might be irrelevant to survival needs, while recognizing that changing times would require adaptability and broad knowledge that could help the next generation succeed in an evolving world. Mr. John Mitchell arrives from checking livestock in distant pastures, his appearance suggesting someone who has successfully adapted to frontier conditions while maintaining the kind of forward-thinking approach that allows families to prosper rather than merely survive in challenging environments. His greeting is warm but measured, reflecting frontier caution about strangers, balanced against community values that emphasized hospitality and mutual support. "Welcome to our place," he says, extending a hand that shows the permanent marks of outdoor work, but also the confidence that comes from years of successful problem-solving and continuous improvement of family circumstances through individual effort and community cooperation. Always glad to meet folks who are interested in seeing how frontier families actually live, rather than just hearing stories about it. His distinction between reality and stories suggests awareness that popular perceptions of frontier life often emphasized dramatic elements, while missing the daily realities of family cooperation, agricultural science, and community building that made permanent settlement possible in challenging environments. John's invitation to see how we do things around here leads to a comprehensive tour of the homestead's operations that reveals the incredible complexity and sophistication of frontier agricultural systems that sustained families while producing surplus crops for trade and sale in regional markets that connected isolated settlements to broader economic networks. The family's livestock operation includes cattle, pigs, chickens, and a workhorse, each species serving multiple functions that maximize utility while minimizing costs and labor requirements. Cattle provide milk, meat, and leather. Pigs convert kitchen scraps and surplus garden produce into high-quality protein. Chickens supply eggs and meat while helping control insect populations. And the horse provides transportation and field work capability essential for agricultural production. Feed systems reveal sophisticated understanding of animal nutrition, seasonal planning, and resource conservation that allows families to maintain livestock through winter months, when natural forage is unavailable and purchased feed is expensive or impossible to obtain. Hay production, grain storage, and root crop preservation require careful timing and substantial labor investment that must be completed during narrow seasonal windows. The garden demonstrates intensive agricultural methods that maximize production from limited space while maintaining soil fertility through crop rotation, composting, and other practices that sustain long-term productivity rather than exhausting land through short-term exploitation. Vegetable varieties include both subsistence crops that provide basic nutrition and specialty items that improve diet quality and provide surplus for trade. Water systems reveal engineering sophistication that solves complex problems using local materials and family labor rather than expensive manufactured equipment or professional services. Wells, cisterns, irrigation channels, and drainage systems represent years of gradual improvement that increases productivity while reducing labor requirements for essential activities like irrigation, livestock watering, and domestic use. Food preservation facilities demonstrate extensive knowledge of techniques that extend growing season productivity throughout the year without refrigeration or commercial processing. Root cellars, smokehouses, canning equipment, and drying areas allow families to convert seasonal abundance into year-round food security that reduces dependence on irregular and expensive commercial food supplies. As the tour continues, John Mitchell's explanations reveal the incredible complexity of agricultural decision-making that occupies frontier families constantly as they balance immediate needs against long-term planning in an environment where weather market prices and countless other variables could transform success into disaster with little warning. Everything's a calculation out here, John explains as he examines soil conditions with the practiced eye of someone who has learned to read environmental signs that others might miss completely. Plant too early and a late frost kills everything. Plant too late and you miss the growing season or run into early winter. Plant the wrong crops and you might survive the year but miss opportunities for real prosperity. His analysis reveals sophisticated understanding of agricultural science that rivals formal training available in more settled areas. Knowledge gained through years of careful observation, systematic experimentation, and painful learning from mistakes that could have been catastrophic if families hadn't maintained reserves and alternative plans to survive unexpected problems. The timing of planting operations requires detailed knowledge of local climate patterns, soil conditions, and crop requirements that must be integrated with family labor, availability, equipment capabilities, and financial resources to create sustainable agricultural systems. Weather records kept by the family show systematic data collection that supports decision-making based on evidence rather than guesswork or tradition. This year, we're trying a new variety of wheat that's supposed to handle drought better, Sarah adds, pointing toward fields where experimental crops are being tested alongside proven varieties that provide reliable but limited yields. Can't afford to risk everything on untested crops, but can't afford to fall behind if better varieties become available either. This balance between innovation and caution characterizes successful frontier agriculture, where families must constantly adapt to changing conditions while maintaining enough stability to survive inevitable setbacks and periods of poor performance that test family resources and resilience. Crop rotation systems reveal understanding of soil science and plant nutrition that maintains fertility while maximizing productivity over multiple growing seasons. Fields planted with grain crops one year support nitrogen-fixing legumes the next, followed by pasture or root crops that restore soil structure and organic matter content essential for sustained agricultural production. The family's record keeping includes detailed observations about weather patterns, pest populations, disease outbreaks and market conditions that affect agricultural success from year to year. These records serve as planning tools for future seasons, while documenting successful practices that can be repeated and unsuccessful experiments that should be avoided. Water management represents one of the most crucial and challenging aspects of frontier agriculture, where irregular precipitation patterns and limited water sources require careful conservation and efficient distribution systems that maximize agricultural productivity while ensuring adequate supplies for domestic use and livestock watering. Lost half our corn crop 2 years ago to drought. John recalls examining irrigation channels that represent considerable investment in manual labor to create reliable water distribution systems. Learned that depending entirely on rainfall is a gamble we couldn't afford to keep taking, so we spent most of the following winter digging channels and building small dams to capture and direct every drop of water that falls on our land. Pest management combines traditional farming practices with innovative approaches developed through local experimentation and information sharing among families facing similar challenges. Crop rotation, companion planting, and natural pest predators provide environmentally sustainable solutions that avoid the expense and potential dangers of manufactured pesticides that might not be available or affordable for frontier families. Disease prevention in both crops and livestock requires constant vigilance and sophisticated understanding of symptoms, treatments, and prevention strategies that could save families from devastating losses that might destroy years of careful work and planning. The family maintains detailed health records for both animals and plants that support early detection and effective treatment of problems before they become catastrophic. Seasonal planning extends far beyond simple agricultural cycles to encompass the entire yearly rhythm of activities that sustain frontier families through changing conditions that demand different skills, equipment, and strategies throughout annual cycles that test every aspect of family organization and resource management. Spring activities focus on soil preparation, planting operations, and equipment maintenance that establishes foundation for the entire growing season. Success during this critical period determines whether families will have adequate food production to sustain themselves through the following winter and surplus crops to generate income for necessary purchases and improvements. Summer work emphasizes cultivation, pest control, irrigation management, and preparation for harvest activities that require precise timing and maximum family effort during short periods when crops must be gathered before weather conditions cause spoilage or loss that could mean disaster for families operating without financial reserves to purchase replacement food supplies. Fall harvest operations demand intense labor that involves entire families working together to gather, process, and store crops. Before winter, weather makes outdoor work impossible and families must depend entirely on stored food, supplies, preserved goods, and careful resource management to survive until spring growing seasons resume. Winter months provide opportunities for equipment repair, building improvements, planning for the following year, and various indoor activities that maintain family productivity while weather conditions prevent outdoor agricultural work. This seasonal adaptation allows families to maintain progress on essential projects while conserving resources during periods when income generation is limited. People back east think winter means rest for farming families. Sarah observes while organizing preserved foods in storage areas that represent months of careful preparation for the annual period when fresh food production stops completely. Truth is, winters when we plan everything for the following year, repair everything that broke during the busy season, and prepare everything we'll need when spring work starts again. The family's storage systems reveal sophisticated understanding of food, preservation, inventory management, and resource allocation that sustains families through months when local food production is impossible and commercial food supplies are expensive, unreliable, or completely unavailable due to transportation difficulties. Root cellars maintain precise temperature and humidity conditions that preserve vegetables, fruits, and dairy products without refrigeration or artificial preservation methods. These underground storage spaces represent considerable investment in manual labor but provide food security that could mean the difference between comfortable survival and genuine hardship during extended winter periods. Meat preservation, through smoking, salting, and drying, creates protein supplies that remain safe and nutritious for months without refrigeration. These preservation methods require specialized knowledge, appropriate facilities, and careful attention to detail that prevents spoilage and waste of valuable protein sources that might be difficult or impossible to replace. Grain storage systems protect harvested crops from moisture rodents and insect damage that could destroy months of agricultural work and leave families without basic carbohydrates that form the foundation of frontier nutrition. Proper storage facilities and pest control measures represent essential investments that protect family food security and potential income from crop sales. As the sun begins its descent toward the western horizon, casting long shadows across the Mitchell homestead and painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, you find yourself reflecting on everything you've witnessed during this remarkable day in 1865. The afternoon light reveals the true scope of the Mitchell family's achievements, not just the buildings and fields that represent years of labor, but the less visible systems of knowledge cooperation and community connection that make survival possible in this demanding environment. Every fence post, every planted row represents not just individual effort, but collective wisdom shared among families who understand that their success depends as much on their neighbors' welfare as their own accomplishments. Sarah Mitchell pauses in her evening chores to watch her children completing their responsibilities with focused attention that speaks to understanding of how individual contributions create family security and community stability. The sight of these young people working with such competence provides a glimpse into the future of frontier communities where the next generation will carry forward lessons learned through years of trial adaptation and gradual improvement. It's not the life we expected when we first came west. John observes his voice carrying the thoughtful tone of someone who has learned to find satisfaction in achievements that might seem modest to outsiders, but represent genuine triumph over circumstances that could have defeated less determined families. Harder in some ways than anything we imagined, easier in others because of what we've learned about working together and depending on each other. His reflection captures something essential about frontier experience that contradicts popular mythology about rugged individualism. The reality reveals itself to be far more complex and ultimately more inspiring. Communities of ordinary people supporting each other through shared challenges, creating prosperity through cooperation rather than competition, and building lasting institutions through collective effort rather than individual heroism. The sound of approaching horses draws attention to the road leading toward town, where Matthews and Harrison can be seen returning from their afternoon survey of the disputed boundary. Their relaxed posture and easy conversation suggest that their morning's conflict has been resolved through the kind of reasonable discussion and community mediation that prevents individual disputes from escalating into divisions that could weaken the entire settlement. Looks like our neighbors worked things out. Sarah comments with obvious relief, because in frontier communities where everyone depends on everyone else for survival, individual conflicts affect collective welfare in ways that make peaceful resolution essential rather than merely desirable. Good thing too, we've all got too much work ahead of us to waste time and energy on arguments that can be settled through honest conversation and fair dealing. The resolution of the boundary dispute illustrates perfectly the reality of frontier life that emphasizes practical problem solving over dramatic confrontation, community cooperation over individual competition, and long-term relationships over short-term advantages. The men's success demonstrates the social skills and mutual respect that make frontier communities function despite constant pressures. As evening approaches, families throughout the area can be seen gathering for activities that build and maintain the social bonds essential for frontier survival. Children play games that combine entertainment with skill development. Women share information about cooking techniques and childcare strategies, and men discuss practical matters while maintaining friendships that transform isolated homesteads into genuine communities. The Mitchell family's evening routine reveals the rhythm of frontier life that balances individual responsibilities with family cooperation and community connection. Livestock must be fed and secured, tools cleaned and stored, and countless small tasks completed to ensure tomorrow's work can begin efficiently. Children. Sarah addresses her young ones as they gather for their evening meal. What did you learn today that you didn't know yesterday? This simple question reveals the frontier emphasis on continuous learning, practical education, and intellectual curiosity that helps people adapt to changing conditions while building on accumulated wisdom. The children's responses demonstrate the remarkable range of knowledge frontier life requires. Emily describes improvements in her seed planting technique that will increase germination rates. James explains a better water-carrying method that reduces spillage while conserving energy. Mary recounts more efficient rock-gathering strategies that make her work more productive. These seemingly simple observations reveal the frontier reality that survival depends on countless small improvements, innovations and adaptations that accumulate over time to create significant advantages for families willing to observe carefully, experiment thoughtfully, and learn continuously from both successes and failures. As darkness settles over the landscape and oil lamps begin appearing in windows throughout the scattered homesteads, the sense of community becomes even more apparent. These isolated lights represent families engaged in similar evening activities, completing daily responsibilities, maintaining social connections, planning for tomorrow's challenges, and finding comfort in the knowledge that neighbors share similar struggles and aspirations. The sound of distant voices carries across the prairie as families call to each other, share brief news, or coordinate tomorrow's collaborative activities. These simple exchanges maintain communication networks that ensure important information reaches everyone who needs it, while reinforcing social bonds that make isolated families part of a larger community with shared interests and mutual obligations. Time to bank the fire and get some rest, John announces as the family completes its evening routine and prepares for sleep that will restore energy for tomorrow's challenges. Another full day ahead, and we'll need clear heads and strong backs to accomplish everything that needs doing. The Mitchell family's bedtime routine includes not just practical preparations for comfortable sleep, but also reflection and gratitude that helps people maintain perspective during difficult times and find meaning in challenges that test human endurance and ingenuity. Their simple prayers express appreciation for the day's accomplishments, concern for neighbors facing difficulties, and hope for continued progress toward goals that extend far beyond mere survival. As you settle into your own rest in this place and time where survival is never guaranteed, but hope remains constant, the lessons of this day in 1865 crystallize into understanding that changes everything you thought you knew about the American frontier experience. The true story of the American West isn't found in dramatic confrontations, heroic individualism, or romantic adventures depicted in popular culture, but in the daily miracles of ordinary people choosing cooperation over competition, community building over personal aggrandizement, and mutual aid over self-interest, even when such choices require personal sacrifice and sustained effort. Every interaction you've witnessed today demonstrates that the real conquest of the frontier was accomplished not through violence and domination, but through the patient, persistent application of human intelligence, cooperation, and moral commitment to creating something better than what existed before. The men who resolved their property dispute through discussion rather than gunfire, the blacksmith who provided free service to help a neighbor, the sheriff who emphasized mediation over punishment, the merchant who extended credit to struggling families, and the farming families who shared knowledge and labor. These are the true heroes of frontier history, whose daily choices created the foundation for everything that would follow in American development. Their legacy isn't found in monuments or museum displays, but in the countless communities throughout America, where people still understand that individual prosperity depends on collective welfare, that personal freedom requires mutual responsibility, and that the highest human achievements result from cooperation rather than competition between people facing shared challenges. The frontier taught lessons about resilience, adaptation, community building, and mutual aid that remain relevant for every generation facing its own unique challenges and opportunities for creating better ways of living together. The specific problems change, but the fundamental human needs for cooperation, mutual support, and shared commitment to something larger than individual interests remain constant across time and circumstances. As sleep finally overtakes you in this boarding house where the wind still whispers through wooden planks with the same voice that welcomed you to this day, you carry with you the understanding that the American West's greatest treasure wasn't gold or silver or vast territories, but the proof that ordinary people can create extraordinary things when they choose to work together rather than struggle alone. In their daily choices, their mutual support, their willingness to help neighbors through difficulties, and their determination to build rather than destroy these frontier communities demonstrated that the highest human achievements result not from individual heroism, but from collective wisdom, not from conquest, but from cooperation, not from defeating others, but from supporting each other through the inevitable challenges that test every generation's commitment to creating a better world. And with that understanding, you drift toward dreams filled with the sound of hammers building homes, children learning essential skills, families working together toward shared goals, and communities choosing hope over fear, cooperation over conflict, and mutual aid over individual ambition. The last sound you hear is that same persistent whisper of wind through wooden planks, the unchanging voice of the American frontier still singing its song of human possibility and the daily miracles that occur when ordinary people choose to care for each other.